You are crouched at the edge of a clearing, somewhere in the warm woodlands of ancient Africa, and you are starving. It has been 2 days since anyone in your group ate anything real. The hunt failed. The good plants near camp are stripped bare, and your children are getting quiet in the way that frightens you most. The quiet that comes before something worse. So you are out here, alone, searching the ground under the fruit trees for anything at all. And you find a pile of fallen fruit, overripe, soft, some of it split open and glistening, buzzing with flies, giving off a sharp, sweet, almost stinging smell that catches in the back of your throat. Part of your brain says rot, says danger, says leave it, but you are too hungry to listen to that voice, and this fruit is sweeter than anything still hanging on the branch. So you eat. Handful after handful of soft, fermenting, sugar-heavy fruit, until your belly is full for the first time in days. And then sitting there in the dirt, something happens to you that has never happened to you before. The world goes soft at the edges. The gnawing fear in your chest loosens its grip. Your body feels warm and loose and strangely, wonderfully light. You don't have a word for it because no word for it exists yet. You don't know that the fruit rotting in the sun has been quietly turned by wild yeast into something new. You don't know you are, at this exact moment, doing something that will echo through your entire species for the next 10 million years. You just know that the world stopped hurting for a little while. And you know, with total certainty, that you will be back for more. Now, step out of that body and back into yours. Because tonight, if you want that exact feeling, you won't have to starve for it, or dig it out of the dirt, or fight the flies for it. You'll just open a fridge, or twist a cap, or walk to a shelf lined with 100 colorful bottles, each one engineered and aged and branded and sold. And you'll pour yourself a glass of something that humans have spent thousands of years perfecting. Alcohol is so woven into your world that it's almost invisible. It's at the wedding and the funeral. It's how we celebrate a promotion and how we mourn a death. It's in our oldest religious rituals and our newest Friday nights. There is an entire global industry worth well over $1 trillion built on that soft, warm feeling you first stumbled into face down in a pile of rotting fruit. But here's the question that's so much stranger than it sounds. Nobody sat down and invented alcohol. It's not like the wheel or the knife, something a clever person designed. Alcohol already existed, out in the world, long before we did. So the real story isn't how we invented it. It's how we found it, how our bodies were secretly built for it before we were even human, and how our hunger for that one specific feeling may have done nothing less than build civilization itself. So how did humans really invent alcohol? To answer that, we have to start with a truth that changes everything. We were drinkers long, long before we were human. Here's the first thing you have to understand, and it's the thing almost nobody realizes. Alcohol is not a human invention at all. It is one of the most natural processes on Earth. Think about what alcohol actually is. When yeast, a tiny microscopic fungus that drifts invisibly through the air and coats the skin of fruit, lands on something sugary, it begins to eat. It consumes the sugar, and as a waste product, it releases two things: carbon dioxide and ethanol. Ethanol is alcohol. That's it. That's the entire miracle. Alcohol is quite literally the droppings of a hungry microbe feasting on sugar. And this has been happening on this planet for 100 million years, since long before any human, any ape, any primate of any kind walked the earth. Every piece of fruit that has ever fallen from a tree and split open in the sun has become, over a few warm days, a tiny natural brewery, which means the very first creatures to get drunk were not people. They were animals, and they still do it today. There are records from all over the world of animals stumbling into natural alcohol. Birds that eat fermented berries and fly straight into windows or fall out of trees. Bats, moths, tree shrews, monkeys, all documented consuming fermented nectar or fruit. In some places, elephants are said to seek out fermenting fruit and grow visibly unsteady. Fermentation is everywhere in nature, and animals have been drinking from that invisible tap since long before we came along. So when our ancestors first tasted alcohol, they weren't inventing anything. They were joining a party that had already been going on for millions of years. And this is where the story takes its first genuinely shocking turn, because it turns out our bodies didn't just tolerate that fermented fruit. They were specifically, molecularly built to handle it. And we can prove exactly when. In 2014, a team of scientists led by a biologist named Matthew Kerrigan did something remarkable. They wanted to know how far back our relationship with alcohol really goes, so they studied an enzyme in our bodies called ADH4. Now, this enzyme matters enormously because it's one of the very first things that goes to work on alcohol the moment it enters your body. It's there in your mouth, your throat, your stomach, the front line of your body's ability to break alcohol down. And here's the clever part. The scientists were able to reconstruct ancient extinct versions of this enzyme from deep in our evolutionary past, essentially resurrecting the exact chemistry our ancestors carried millions of years ago, and testing how well each version could handle alcohol. What they found rewrites the whole story. For most of our deep evolutionary history, going back 40 million years, our tree-dwelling ancestors were terrible at processing alcohol. Their version of the enzyme could barely handle it at all. If they'd eaten a lot of fermented fruit, they'd have gotten violently, dangerously drunk off almost nothing. But then, right around 10 million years ago, something changed. A single genetic mutation appeared in the common ancestor of humans, chimpanzees, and gorillas. And that one mutation made the ADH4 enzyme roughly 40 times better at breaking down alcohol. 40 times. Now think about the timing, because this is the beautiful part. 10 million years ago is right around when our ancestors were coming down out of the trees and starting to spend their lives on the ground. And what's on the ground? Fallen fruit. The ripest, softest, most fermented, most alcoholic fruit there is, lying in the dirt, exactly the kind of food a hungry, ground-dwelling ape would start eating in large amounts. The scientists' conclusion is stunning in its simplicity. Our ancestors evolved the ability to safely eat fermented fruit precisely because they needed it. Alcohol wasn't a treat. It was survival food. That overripe, fermenting fruit on the forest floor was calories-free energy at a time when starving was a constant threat. The ones who could stomach it lived. The ones who couldn't were at a disadvantage. And so, across countless generations, we became a species genetically shaped to consume alcohol. Sit with that for a second, because it reframes everything about how you think about drinking. Your ability to enjoy a beer tonight is not some modern vice. It is a 10-million-year-old survival adaptation written into your DNA from a time when finding fermented fruit could mean the difference between living and dying. We didn't invent our taste for alcohol, we inherited it from apes who needed it to survive. But there is a gigantic leap between an ape eating fermented fruit off the ground and a human deliberately making alcohol on purpose. Eating what nature gives you is one thing. Learning to create it yourself, from scratch, on demand, is something else entirely. So when did we cross that line? When did we stop just finding alcohol and start brewing it? For a long time, the answer everyone assumed went like this. First, humans invented farming. First, we settled down, planted grain, built villages, and only then, once we had surplus crops and time on our hands, did we figure out how to turn that grain into beer. Alcohol in this story was a happy accident of agriculture, a luxury that came after we'd already built a stable, settled world. It made sense. It felt obvious. And it may be completely backwards. To see why, we go to a cave in the hills near what is now Haifa in Israel. It's called Rakifet Cave. And 13,000 years ago, it belonged to a people called the Natufians. Now, the Natufians are fascinating because they lived right on the knife's edge of one of the biggest transitions in human history. They were hunter-gatherers, but they had started to settle down in one place before farming had really taken hold. And this particular cave was not a home. It was a graveyard, a place where the Natufians buried their dead, around 30 individuals laid to rest, some of them, remarkably, on beds of flowers. And in 2018, a team of researchers from Stanford and the University of Haifa examined the stone mortars, the carved bowl-like hollows in the rock, that the Natufians had left in that burial cave. When they analyzed the residue trapped in the stone, they found something that pushed the story of alcohol back further than anyone had proven before. They found the chemical and physical signatures of beer. Wheat and barley that had been malted, mashed, and left to ferment using a 3-stage brewing process 13,000 years ago. This is the oldest physical evidence of humans deliberately making alcohol ever discovered, and here is the detail that gives me chills. It was found in a graveyard. This ancient beer wasn't casual. It appears to have been brewed for ritual feasts, ceremonies to honor and mourn the dead. Some of the very first alcohol humans ever deliberately made, we made to say goodbye to the people we loved. The connection between a drink and a funeral, between alcohol and grief, may be as old as brewing itself. But notice the timing, because it's everything. 13,000 years ago is before farming was fully established. These people were brewing beer while they were still, in large part, hunting and gathering, which means alcohol didn't come after agriculture. It came before it. And that leads to one of the most fascinating and hotly debated ideas in all of archaeology. Here's the question that has divided scientists for over 60 years. What if the thirst for beer is the reason we became farmers in the first place? Think about it. The standard story says we started farming grain because we were hungry, because we needed bread. But growing grain is brutally hard work. You have to clear land, plant, weed, harvest, and process it, season after season, year after year. It's a punishing lifestyle, and early farmers were often less healthy than the hunter-gatherers who came before them. So some researchers have asked a provocative question. Would people really have taken on all that backbreaking misery just for bread? Or might there have been a more powerful motivation? Something that made all that labor feel worth it? Something like beer. This is the famous beer before bread hypothesis, and it was first seriously proposed back in the 1950s. The idea is that the desire to produce alcohol, for feasts, for rituals, for the powerful social glue that shared drinking creates, may have been a key push that drove humans to start cultivating grain in the first place. And in recent years, this idea has found powerful new support at one of the most astonishing sites on Earth, a place in modern Turkey called Göbekli Tepe. Göbekli Tepe is almost impossible to believe. It's a complex of massive carved stone pillars, some of them weighing many tons, arranged in great rings, and it was built around 11,000 years ago. That makes it thousands of years older than Stonehenge, older than the pyramids, older than writing, older than the wheel. And here's the part that broke archaeologists' brains when they found it. It was built by hunter-gatherers. People without farms, without cities, without metal tools, somehow came together in enormous numbers to quarry, carve, and raise these giant stones. And the big question has always been, why? What could possibly motivate hunter-gatherers to gather in such huge groups and do such staggering amounts of work? And at Göbekli Tepe, archaeologists found enormous stone vessels, some capable of holding well over 100 liters, containing chemical traces that suggest they may have held fermenting grain. In other words, beer. The picture that emerges is extraordinary. Great numbers of people coming together at a sacred site, doing monumental communal labor, and being rewarded with feasts and with alcohol. The beer may have been the thing that brought them together and kept them working, and to supply enough grain for those feasts, they would have needed to gather and eventually cultivate cereals on a massive scale. The drink may have driven the farming. Now, I have to be straight with you here, the way this channel always tries to be. This is not settled fact. The beer before bread idea remains a genuine debate among serious scientists, and plenty of them still argue that food, not alcohol, was the main driver of agriculture. The truth is probably tangled, with bread and beer and hunger and ritual all pushing together. But the fact that this is even a serious argument tells you something profound. The question of whether humanity settled down and built civilization partly out of a desire to drink is a real, scientific question. Our thirst for that ancient feeling may be woven into the very foundations of the world you live in. And once humans truly figured out how to brew, the practice exploded across the entire planet. For the single oldest recipe we can actually reconstruct, we travel to a place called Jiahu in China. Around 9,000 years ago, the people of this Neolithic village were making something that the molecular archaeologist Patrick McGovern was able to identify in astonishing detail by analyzing the residue soaked deep into their pottery. This is the oldest chemically confirmed alcoholic beverage in the world, and we know almost exactly what was in it. It was a mixed fermented drink, part rice beer, part honey mead, part fruit wine made from rice, honey, and hawthorn fruit or wild grapes. It probably had an alcohol content similar to a modern beer. 9,000 years ago, in a village in China, people were brewing a sophisticated, multi-ingredient cocktail and drinking it from carefully made cups. And this wasn't happening in just one place. All around the world, completely independently, humans were arriving at the same discovery. In the Middle East, they brewed barley beer and grape wine. In China, rice and honey. In the Americas, they would make chicha from maize. And in the Andes, beverages from other local plants. In Africa, beers from sorghum and millet. Every one of these peoples, separated by oceans and thousands of years, most of whom never had any contact with each other, looked at the plants around them and figured out how to turn them into alcohol. That is how deep the pull is. That is how universal. Give human beings sugar and time, and they will find their way to a drink. It happened everywhere, over and over, because the desire for it is written into what we are. So step back and look at the whole sweep of it, because when you do, something genuinely mind-bending comes into focus. We tell ourselves that alcohol is a simple pleasure, a drink at the end of a hard day, a toast at a celebration. Something fun, something modern, maybe something a little frivolous. But that's not what the evidence says at all. The evidence says our relationship with alcohol is one of the oldest and deepest relationships our species has. It began 100 million years ago with yeast and fallen fruit, long before us. It shaped our very bodies 10 million years ago, when a single mutation turned our ancestors into creatures that could survive on fermented food. It may have helped pull us down from a wandering life and root us into villages, farms, temples, and cities. It has been at our funerals and our weddings, our sacred rites and our ordinary evenings for as far back as we can see. Alcohol was never really invented. It was discovered again and again by animals in the forest, by starving apes on the ground, by grieving people in a burial cave, by builders raising the world's first temple, by villagers in China perfecting a recipe. Every glass raised tonight, anywhere on Earth, is the newest link in a chain that stretches back millions of years, all the way to the first ancestor, who bit into a piece of rotting fruit and felt, for one strange and wonderful moment, the world go soft and warm and kind. So the next time you find yourself holding a drink, at a party, at a wake, at a quiet table at the end of a long week, and you feel that familiar warmth spread through you, remember what you're really holding. You are holding a feeling that your ancestors chased out of the dirt when they were starving. A feeling their bodies evolved over 10 million years to survive. A feeling that may have helped convince all of humanity to stop wandering and build a world. You are not just having a drink. You are reaching back across 10 million years and taking part in one of the oldest, strangest, most human stories there is. It started with a starving ancestor, a pile of fallen fruit, and a warmth they had no name for. And in some small way, every single time, we are still chasing that very same feeling they found on the forest floor, all that time ago.